Seemingly everyone complains about Airbnb. They have sky-high fees, overly sensitive hosts that make you take out the trash and clean, even though you pay a ridiculous cleaning fee. They have terrible customer service. So why does it seem like it's the only option when you want to rent an apartment when you travel? The truth is that Airbnb hasn't just built a marketplace, it's built a monopoly of perception. They have their review systems, insurance policies, and seemingly use human psychology to keep both their guests and their hosts trapped. And this is all while competitors like Vrbo and Expedia seem to struggle to break into this specific market. So let's dive into why Airbnb has a stranglehold on the short-term rental market. And if you stick around to the end, I'm gonna break down how this ultimately hurts you, the consumer, but not in the way that you would expect. By the way, I'm Rigo, and my focus is studying how the world's biggest companies actually make money and the lessons that we can learn from their strategies. Peter Thiel, one of the founders of PayPal, wrote in one of his famous books, 0 to 1, "A legal monopoly is the condition of every successful business." So think about this for a second. When you want a rideshare, you don't say, "Let's get a Lyft," and you definitely don't say, "Let's order a rideshare." You say, "Let's grab an Uber," even if you're actually booking a Lyft or another service. And this is the same way that people say, "Google it," instead of saying, "Search it." And the same way people say, like, "Here's a Kleenex," versus "Here's a tissue." So before I dive into this and explain how Airbnb uses the same strategy, what exactly do I mean when I say monopoly? Because I'm not talking about the board game. So think about it. Obviously, Google doesn't own the internet, right? But it owns how you search it. Kleenex doesn't own tissues, but it owns the word essentially. And that's what a monopoly is here. It's when one brand becomes the only name that people think of when it comes to that particular industry. And Airbnb was able to accomplish this with short-term rentals or apartment rentals. And it's not because it owns every rental, obviously, but it's because it owns the perception of rentals. So think about it a little deeper here. When you want a place that isn't a hotel when you travel, you don't say, "Let's book a vacation rental." You say, "Let's get an Airbnb." And that shift from product to verb is how companies quietly create monopolies. They don't just dominate the market, they dominate the language. And once you control the language, you control the default choice in people's minds. And that gives you a ton of leeway to the things that you can change within your product, even if it's solely to your benefit, and people are still gonna continue to use you because they think about you when they think about taking that particular action. So to summarize it here, Airbnb is essentially shorthand or short for short-term rental, right? Just like Google equals searching the internet, Kleenex equals tissues, and Uber equals hailing a ride. The psychological power here is in becoming the default. Now here's the second way that Airbnb has gotten a tight hold of this market. And it's really the invisible glue that keeps Airbnb seemingly untouchable. And that's their review system. So for guests, reviews are trust currency, right? You're not just booking a stranger's spare room or apartment, you're booking a home that hundreds of other travelers have already vetted for you. You feel safe because the crowd says it is safe. And that's the psychology of social proof. But the real trap here is for the host. Because imagine you've built this portfolio of 300 glowing 5-star reviews, and it's essentially become like your digital reputation. But now let's say you switch this to Vrbo, and now you're starting at 0. 0 reviews often means 0 bookings. It's like walking away from years of credibility. And that's why even frustrated hosts, the ones that are furious about fees and policies, they rarely leave. The cost just isn't financial, it's psychological. And throwing away your reviews, it feels like erasing your identity as a host. And that's the genius of Airbnb's design. It's a double-sided review system. It doesn't just make the guests feel safer, but it also locks hosts into the platform with essentially golden handcuffs. And it turns every other competitor into the riskier option, even if the listings are identical. The lesson here is that Airbnb doesn't just control the rentals, it controls the trust layer. And in business, trust is harder to compete on than even price. One of Airbnb's boldest promises is something that they call air cover. And it's essentially marketed as this free damage protection, this loss coverage and liability insurance for both hosts and guests. And on paper, it feels like a safety net, a blanket, peace of mind. But here's the catch. The net has holes. Claims can drag on for weeks, payouts get denied, and every year hosts share horror stories of being left with thousands in damages. The promise often looks better than reality. So why does it still work? Because psychology beats policy. The perception of protection is more powerful than the fine print. And for a first-time user, if you're seeing $3 million in liability coverage, essentially enough to silence your doubts. The words alone reduce risk in your mind. But here's a business lesson. Airbnb doesn't need to provide the perfect insurance. It just needs to sell the feeling of safety, that illusion that adds to that trust. And that trust is what makes people hit book now. When you try to navigate other booking sites, they just don't feel the same as Airbnb. And if you open the Airbnb app, you'll notice these soft colors, these big photos, this playful font and typography. And it's a layout that feels more like Instagram than a booking site. It's travel made more visual, and it makes you want to browse. It has an ease of browsing, and it tends to put these gems at the very top. So right away, you feel like you found a good deal. And the design is intentional psychology. Endless scroll feeds, bold visuals, clean booking flows, it all reduces friction, right? You don't feel like you're making a transaction, you sort of feel like you're already on vacation. And layer on top of that the ecosystem effect, right? One app, global coverage, and it's a familiar interface, whether you're booking a loft in Lisbon, a cabin in Montana, or a treehouse in Bali. It all feels the same. And it's familiarity disguised as trust. And then come the perks. Discounted long stays for weeks or month-long stays, experiences, trip integrations with maps and planners. And Airbnb has quietly become this travel operating system, you can call it. And other competitors like Vrbo and Booking.com, now their interfaces feel clunky, they feel outdated, transactional. They don't trigger that same dopamine hit that you get from the visuals or the flow of Airbnb. And that matters, especially in a niche like travel. Because with user psychology, design contributes and equals to trust. And the result here is that even as people complain about fees or hosts, they come back anyways. Right? Airbnb doesn't just own the market, it owns the experience. And when your product feels better and easier to use, every alternative feels like work. Like we've covered, competitors exist, but none of them have seemed to crack Airbnb's dominance. Take Vrbo, right? Their model is built almost entirely around whole homes, which is perfect for families or groups, but it cuts out solo travelers and couples who make up the majority of these trips. Airbnb, meanwhile, they offer everything. A spare room, a luxury villa, flexibility wins. Now there's other sites like Booking.com and Expedia. Those platforms were built though more in the hotel era. And their DNA is corporate travel, loyalty points, last minute deals. Right, and when they tried short-term rentals, they had a more transactional feel to them. Right? You don't get the same discounts, you don't have the same layout, you don't have the same ease of flow. It doesn't have that minor friction and familiarity that Airbnb has built over the past decade. What they all miss is cultural story. Because Airbnb doesn't just say book a place, it says live like a local. Right? Stay in real neighborhoods, not just hotel zones, and feel like you belong, even if it's only for a few nights. And that narrative is powerful. It transforms a transaction into an identity. But here's the paradox. Complaints about Airbnb are everywhere. Fees keep rising, cleaning checklists feel like chores that you do at home, and horror stories hit the headlines on forums and Reddit and things like that, seemingly every month. But yet people keep booking. Why is this? It's because when it comes down to behavior, familiarity beats frustration. And psychologists call this the status quo bias. When you're used to a platform, your saved trips, your reviews, your login, your credit card information, it feels easier to just stay put than to start fresh somewhere else. Even if you're a bit annoyed, you default back to what you know. And for competitors like Vrbo and Booking, that's the real uphill battle, right? They're not just asking people to book a different rental, they're asking people to abandon years of comfort, habits, and trust signals, and rebuild them essentially from scratch, in addition to all the other discounts and things that they're losing out on. In other words, Airbnb's biggest advantage isn't the properties themselves, it's inertia. And inertia is one of the hardest monopolies to break. Here's the dark side of Airbnb's monopoly of perception. It doesn't just lock in hosts and outmaneuver competitors. It shills and it sends the cost back onto you, the traveler. Because there's no real alternatives, fees can keep climbing year after year. Because reviews don't transfer, hosts stay trapped. And now they're passing those fees on to higher nightly rates and stickier rules. Because the air cover can be more of an illusion than reality, you're buying into a promise of safety that may not be there when you need it most. And this is the paradox. The more Airbnb wins, the fewer options you have. And competition is usually what keeps prices fair and service honest. But when one company owns the perception of an industry, consumers lose leverage. So next time you book a charming loft in Lisbon, you might want to ask yourself, are you choosing Airbnb or has Airbnb already chosen for you? So I hope you enjoyed this style of video. If you did, I'd love to hear about your experience with Airbnb below. Let me know, has your experience been positive, neutral, negative? I'd love to hear your thoughts. So if you like this style of video, do me a quick favor, hit the subscribe button, hit the like button. That way I can keep producing more videos like this. Shoot me some ideas in the comments. Would love to hear what you want to hear about next.